This week on the show, we have a special episode because we have an interview finally on this audio format now with Trenton Schulz about his early days with FreeBSD, RobotOS, Qt, and more. So hopefully that's interesting to you. And next week we have a regular episode as always. BSD Now, episode 321, the RobotOS, recorded for the 23rd of October 2019. Hello, I'm your host, Benedikt Treutschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And as mentioned in the cold opening, we'll have a little bit of a special this time. So we have an interview that's a bit longer, so we thought this is a special episode since it's our first recording of this type, since we switched to audio only. So enjoy our interview with Trenton Schulz. Welcome to our first interview in our audio-only format that we finally managed to actually schedule and made happen. So we managed to drag Trenton Schulz before the camera, or before the actually microphone, and he will be talking to us about a little bit more about RobotOS on FreeBSD. So first, welcome to the show, and can you tell us a little bit first about yourself, since you haven't been on the show yet, and how you got started with BSD?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Benedikt. So my name is Trenton Schulz. Now I work as a researcher at the Norwegian Computing Center. But earlier, I've been a PhD student and a software engineer. And how I got started in BSD was basically when I started doing my bachelor back in Minnesota in the late 90s. And I remember it was a game night at one of the computer labs, and everybody was allowed to bring in and play computer games on the lab computers. Except there were a couple of people in the back of the room who had brought in their own computers. And the reason they had done that is because then they could access the network. And they were installing this weird DOS thing on their computers, or at least that's what it looked like to me. And so I went and asked, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we're installing FreeBSD. And I'm like, well, what is FreeBSD? And they're it's an operating system. And I was like, you mean like Windows or whatever? And they're like, yeah, but it's Unix or something like that. And I had heard about Unix at that point, so I was kind of interested in it. So that's kind of how I got started with working with FreeBSD. So within a week or two, I had brought my computer in and installed it. And then it was about three of us at the university who were working with FreeBSD, and then kind of sending questions back and forth to each other, or looking in the mailing lists and things like that. I learned a lot about how, I think I installed FreeBSD 2.2.5, I believe, was the version that we had. And of course, the thing that was interesting was just getting the software to work. So I remember working, I was complaining that the sound didn't work, and I wanted to listen to music or something like that. And that meant upgrading to current. Or so I had a friend who had no problem, running build world on my computer and upgrading it to current. Of course, then other things didn't work. So I got to learn a little bit about how all this, how these operating system things work. So I guess that's kind of how I got introduced to BSD. And in some ways, that's kind of what ended up getting me my first job, my first real job, I would say. And actually, in some ways, getting me over to Norway. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Tell us a little bit about how you got that first job related to BSD.
Well, it was sort of tangentially. So I was while I was doing my computer science studies, one of the things I was interested in was being able to do graphics on computers. And since I was using FreeBSD and the X window system, I wanted to do graphics on that. And I was looking for toolkits that I could work with to do that. And since at that time at the or that college, they were teaching us how to do C++ programming, I found the Qt library, or Qt as it's called among all the people who program, or who are the programmers for it. So I basically started like working on some small Qt programs on my own, and then I kind of rolled them all up into a little package, sent them off to Trolltech, and with my resume, which I had written in plain text. But they were looking for people, so it was okay. And I think there was a real appeal at that time that Norway kind of had a shortage of C++ programmers who weren't in the oil industry. So it was easy. So the fact that I actually wanted to come to Norway, like that was great. So I ended up coming to Norway, and eventually, that's a long story in and of itself. But then I got a FreeBSD box while I was here, or when I got to Trolltech, and at that time I was kind of helping out with the Qt embedded port, which was basically using the frame buffer. And of course, I was interested in trying to get that to work with FreeBSD, but I didn't know nearly enough how to do that. But there was a virtual frame buffer that worked on X11 and was just basically a memory mapped shared memory, so you could actually display things and use the Qt embedded windowing system and everything. And I remember the first weekend I was there, or the first couple of days I was there, fixing the Qt the Qt virtual frame buffer to actually work on FreeBSD, because it was just using some semaphore things that were using very Linux-specific calls, and then just changing them over to use the FreeBSD ones. And then worked on both of them. So I think that was probably the first commit I did to Qt, actually. I was actually shared a room with this guy named Brad, who also was a giant FreeBSD person. He had worked on the Blackbox window manager, which was kind of the forerunner to the Fluxbox window manager. So we were like the two FreeBSD people at Trolltech, which was the idea was to kind of at least make sure that we were somewhat semi-operable on other operating systems, or other Unixes, I should say.
Oh, that's great.
How long were you there?
I was at Trolltech for, I guess 7 years, until they became part of Nokia. And then I stayed on for a year at Nokia as well. So at that point, I had moved off from FreeBSD and was working with the Mac. The main reason for that was this was in the, I guess, mid FreeBSD 4 days. And the thing was that you kind of got into this interesting state with ports, where things would kind of get out of date, and you would sometimes need to update one port, which you would maybe download a tarball of that one port from cd-rom.com or whatever, and build that, and then everything would get out of whack, and then you would run this port upgrade utility and try to rebuild all your ports, and it was really getting annoying. There was nothing like package or anything that we have these days.
Exactly.
So I think it was a point where I was like, okay, I'm willing to let a vendor do all that extra maintenance work so I could program, because that was the point. Trolltech had hired me to program, or program on Qt, not maintain my system.
Yes, or maintain an operating system's use of Qt and so on.
Yeah, in some sense. That was the other thing too, right? So you would mostly run KDE or other things, and of course there was this whole issue of if you were rebuilding Qt all the time, which Qt were you actually using in different things to notice bugs or stuff. So yeah, you got into these weird issues. So I'd stayed away from, or I'd moved over to the Mac for a while then, and then I had basically finished up one of these big projects, which was porting the Qt, or helping out leading this port of Qt to the Cocoa windowing toolkit that's on the Mac. And then once that was kind of finished up, I kind of felt like, yeah, I need to try something different. So I jumped into research, which is interesting in its own ways.
So what kind of things have you been doing research on?
Well, I just turned in my PhD dissertation on human-robot interaction. So what I was dealing with there was kind of two separate points. One point was looking at this idea of having robots in the home in possible future scenarios. And then what you would do in those cases, or one thing that you kind of have to be concerned about are what sort of privacy issues arise with having like basically a computer with lots of sensors that moves around your house. So what do you do with that to make things sort of, or what sort of issues do you need to think about for that? And then the other thing kind of goes back to my GUI programming days at Qt, and I'm interested in animation techniques and ways that robots can move to make them a bit more lively or a bit more like entertaining. So I was also looking at how you could use animation techniques to move robots and how that affects people interacting with them. So yeah, I've just turned it in. We'll find out how that works, or we'll find out what the committee thinks of it, and yeah. But that's my most recent research, at least.
Oh, okay.
So that's things like they're using animation techniques for how the robot moves to make it, less jarring and
less. How could you say robot-like in a sense?
The first thing that I thought of, like, let's make it look like it's drunk. Like, let's move it not in a straight line anymore. Just
yeah, that can be kind of a fun way of messing with the local planner, so as to speak. I think the thing that's also a bit interesting is that you have all these physical constraints that you don't have when you're like maybe animating on the screen, right? If you want to make a smooth animation, you kind of. Or if you want something to move instantly across a screen, for example, you just basically say, in the next frame, you're going to draw on the other side of the screen, right? And a robot can't do that. It's kind of got...
Yeah, it's like you need to accelerate and then decelerate and... Exactly.
So you're kind of figuring things out in a different way. But it was good stuff, and it was fun. So, yeah. So I'm going to probably be working a little bit more with robots in the future as well, so... We'll see what sort of funding proposals get funded, or what proposals get funded. That's always how research is.
Yeah. Chasing the next money. Yeah. So, but is that related to your work with Robot OS?
Well, in a way. like most things for me with FreeBSD, it's always kind of a side hustle type thing or something, it seems. So when I started at the university was it was the University of Oslo, and they're very, at least the informatics department is pretty open about what you can run whatever computer you want in general. Like, it's just that you're going to kind of have to, if it's like a Windows machine, they of course will administrate everything, but if you're running a Mac or something else, you pretty much have free reign. So I said, like, okay, I'm going to get one of these nice new ThinkPads and try running FreeBSD on it again, because I hadn't done it for a while. And actually, at that exact point, all the new MacBooks had come out, and I was very unimpressed with what they were offering as far as, like, something that I could open up and repair.
I hear you.
Having had to do that with Macs before, I was, we could say, less than confident that... that wouldn't happen. So I got a ThinkPad installed. I had to install what was called at the time TrueOS to get the wireless card and everything working. And I used that, was able to use that for about a year, and there was really no problem for the work I was doing. And then I would use virtual machines to run ROS, or the robot operating system, or ROS. I guess I should maybe stop and explain what ROS is before going a bit further. So ROS is basically sort of it's a way of it's a middleware that can kind of communicate between different nodes on a network that it builds. And the idea is that you can create topics that publish information. For example, it can be pictures from a video camera. It can be sensor readings. It can be commands to tell you how fast your servos should be moving, or things like that. And the thing is that it's can be distributed, so you can run it on different computers. And at the same time, it's a very standardized interface. So basically, once you have a driver on your robot that can basically publish information in a good way, you can just hook it up to the node and everyone can use it. And it's a very open source project, so it's easy to get all these packages. So you normally don't have to, in the way of most researchers, you don't always have them all the time in the world to solve all the problems. So you find a library that's been done already. So it's a pretty nice little system of packages and communication. And it was set up to only work on Linux, more or less. You could run it in with Homebrew on the Mac and using, I guess, the Linux layer on Windows 10. But they kind of had set up, it currently was set up as that they would do distros that basically followed Ubuntu. So when Ubuntu did an LTS release, they would do an LTS release, and they would basically support that on all the robots or whatever until the time ran out for that. And yeah, so I had this FreeBSD box, and I had to start working with one of these robots that was using ROS. And I was like, well, I don't want to have to do all this network hopping to get a virtual machine to talk directly to this robot. And I just thought I would try to port it. So I downloaded the sources and basically started working through building that. And it's a job. Most of the stuff is all written in C++ or Python. It's all based on CMake stuff. And as far as I could tell, most of that stuff is already in FreeBSD. So, if I could follow these scripts, it would probably work okay-ish. And I got pretty far that I got the basic communication stuff done. And I was like, okay, this might actually be something I could do. I could actually get this up and working. Because I managed to get that done in basically a day while I was, just having that compile in the background while I worked on other stuff. But then I realized I needed the graphical components that are also part of ROS. So ROS also has a lot of debugging tools and ways of visualizing data and simulating robots as well, because you don't want to, how could you say, blow up a robot by putting bad code on it. You want to simulate it first. So then I started to look at okay, I can start to try to port these other programs as well to get a desktop version of ROS. And I kind of had to stop, or I started, but then it got to be really tough because one of the first things that needed to be built was this OpenCV computer vision library. And at that time, FreeBSD had version 2, but this needed version 3. And that was a giant port, or rather, that was just a giant thing to be built. And then at the same time, there was also, it needed Python Qt bindings, and that it didn't say for sure which ones it needed. And if you know the Qt community, there's at least 2 different types of Qt bindings that are available for Python. And it just got to be a mess. So I spent a few days on it, but then I kind of realized I had to actually get this done quicker than spending time on getting everything to compile. So I actually had to bite the bullet and install Ubuntu on the computer and just go and get things done, which was fine. You have to make a balance on things, but then I realized I could give this another shot because things have happened. That incident was in 2017. We're in 2019. I saw that OpenCV had come in. We had modern Qt and everything, and I figured that this could just work. So, and then I also had read Michael W. Lucas's book on jails, so I learned I had a much better grasp on how to use the jails. So then I was able to create the jail, copy or download the sources, install all the prerequisites, and actually get compiling. And of course, I had created ports for some of these building tools that you need to use for ROS, and put those in the ports tree as well. So it was really quite nice to use that in jails. It got rid of issues of knowing which Qt bindings you needed and stuff, because of course you had a clean environment.
Doesn't conflict with the version of Qt you're trying to use for your desktop at the same time.
You got it. So I was very happy and wondering why I hadn't did this earlier. But you need a bit of you need, how could you say, it's difficult to just kind of step into jails. You kind of have to do some reading to kind of really understand how they really work, I think.
Yeah, Michael Lucas found that when he went to write the jails book and found he had to write 6 other books first.
Indeed. And I've read those other 6 books, and I believe he's correct, because it's it is one of those things when you're reading a chapter in there and you're like, oh yeah, this earlier book, I remember now I understand. Now I understand how this fits into using it in the jail.
Well, yeah, it's like the book on specialty file systems. Who's that book for? Well, it turns out if you're going to use nullfs and this other stuff and try to make it work in a jail, you need all this background, and it just wasn't going to make sense to try to shoehorn that in at the beginning of the jail book or something. And so it kind of just ballooned.
Yeah, and that was also the devfs file system and everything was also something that was, someone who had been using FreeBSD 4, and then suddenly, having used the old make dev script, and then finally finding that all these nodes are created for you automatically, and that you can, do all sorts of nice things, assigning permissions and groups and running scripts. I was like, wow, this is nice and modern. It's great. So,
or even just the jail's hide everything except for the basic things that it needs, like dev null.
Exactly.
And it's oh, look, it can't see my hard drives. That's actually the way I would prefer it.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say with that was nice was that I also was able to finally build a cups jail, which I had tried and failed multiple times to do after reading that book. So I saw recently that Michael was saying that he had it wasn't the big sales winner, but it's definitely a great book. So, yeah.
No, it's definitely good.
Yeah, you might not think you need it, but once you read it, you'll realize there's all kinds of ways you could be using this to make your life easier. Yeah,
back to the raw stuff. So I had gotten with using those jails, I was able to build the comms stuff up again, which is the basic communications things, and then build up the desktop side of it as well. And yeah, I basically got a working ROS thing that would work with the basic tools. So I could use the graphing tools, I could do the visualization tools and stuff. I still didn't have the simulators because nobody's ported those yet, which I guess can make sense. It's kind of those simulators are kind of a specialized thing for robots only. And if you don't have all of ROS there's not much point in porting it on its own. So that's a Gazebo, or the simulators are a Gazebo, which is sort of the big one there. Though, as far as I know, some people are considering going over to using things like Unity or Unreal as well, but I don't think they have the same physics engines as the Gazebo simulator. So yeah, so then I got that, and then I decided I would, once I got that in pretty good order, I thought this might be an interesting talk for EuroBSDCon. So then I decided to write up a abstract for that and send it off to EuroBSDCon.
Ah.
So was EuroBSDCon your first BSD conference?
Yeah, it was. I think, because if I remember right, BSD Can was early 2000s, wasn't it? The first BSD Can.
Yeah.
And that was the thing, right? So I remember there was some sort of FreeBSD conference in 2000 or whatever. But at that point, I was a bachelor student. I didn't have money to travel or anything like that. And then afterwards, when I think the BSD CAN thing started, I was in Norway, and I was just like, I was sort of interested in it at the beginning, but I was like, that's a long ways to travel when I don't know what it's going to be like or anything. And yeah, I would say jet lag kind of sucks and everything. So, yeah, there's other things you end up doing. But I think that was kind of the nice thing about EuroBSDCon, like the fact that it was coming to Lillehammer, Norway, was that now there really is no excuse not to go. And I thought it's a worthwhile thing. So yeah, it was my first conference, and yeah, it was quite enjoyable. It was really neat to run into all these different people who have this interest in operating systems, and actually being able to just kind of, you can start a conversation with most everybody there, and yeah, find out something very interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and it can be really nice to just be in a room full of people that are also interested in this kind of niche thing you're interested in, right?
Exactly. And it's just kind of, it's a fun thing. I mean, I've been to the cute developer summits and everything like that, or not. They were cute developer days, is what they were called back when I did Qt. It was always great to just kind of sit and talk with people, and yeah, it's one of those nice things about open source conferences in general, that you can find your group of people who are interested in similar things, and talk with them and find out more interesting stuff as well. So yeah, there's interesting talks and there's interesting people to meet.
Sorry, when we had the social event, we got to all sit around a table, and we just had everybody kind of tell a little bit of their story of what they liked about BSD and how they got into it and stuff. And I found that really interesting.
Yeah.
As we were just, having dinner.
Yeah. And it's also that's actually a very easy topic too, at least for, I guess, not for the general population, but for people who are interested in BSD, it's actually a kind of an interesting topic, and everyone will have an interesting story or an interesting use case, if nothing else, about why they use it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. It's the kind of thing that everybody at the table will have something they can contribute. Whereas, if we had picked a more specific topic, like, Tom's interest in the TCP/IP stack, not everybody maybe would have contributed to the conversation in the same way.
Indeed. And,
it's kind of one of the things we've tried to do with the interviews on the show is capturing that particular question. How did you get started? Because actually, Dag Erling, who was the head of or hosting the conference this year, he got into BSD because he used to build those assembly demo programs.
Demo scene?
Right, yeah.
It would be like a little 30 kilobyte thing that would be like a half-hour presentation with all these graphics, and it's like, how do they fit that in this 30 kilobyte executable? And he was looking for something a little better than MS-DOS to base them on, and somebody gave him a FreeBSD CD, and that's how he got into FreeBSD. I'm like, that seems like an interesting path for someone who ends up, doing IT security and being the FreeBSD security officer for a while, and doing PAM and all this authentication stuff from those weird art demo things.
Well, the demo scene, I think, was also very big in Norway as well. Mm-hmm. So there are still demo parties that I've or at least I know people who are involved in that, and it's really quite interesting how they're still going on, and there's still some really quite amazing work that's going on, especially when you're going for things like the smallest size executable, or doing things in only software and stuff. So yeah, it's quite an amazing scene, and yeah, could easily see somebody picking up for FreeBSD there to do something a bit different.
Yeah. And I had the same with my first BSD conference, because I said, it's in my country. EuroBSDCon travels around, it turns out. And so you have no excuse of saying no, because whenever do you get the chance again when the conference is in your country? And so that's when I went, and then subsequent conferences followed, and here I am.
Yeah.
That's why that's a good thing that EuroBSDCon is not in the same place every year. So as much as organizing is concerned with that as well, but it gives people the chance from different countries to go to a conference in their own country.
And you get to experience the different culture in the different countries as well, which is kind of a fun part of being in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, for me coming from North America, it's been a great excuse to go to quite a few different countries in Europe over the last 10 years.
Mm. Yeah, indeed.
I guess it's only been like 7 years of me going, but, but just...
That's still 7 different countries.
Exactly. That most of which I probably would have never visited. I wouldn't have had no reason to go otherwise, basically. So you enjoyed the conference? What would you say was the thing you enjoyed the most about the conference?
Well, let's see. One thing I enjoyed was the tutorial the first day. That was Tom's tutorial on FreeBSD hardware hacking. Because I was just kind of interested. I had never done a lot of that stuff myself. I've always been involved with people who have, but I've never actually got to sit down and try out some of this stuff myself. And I really enjoyed working on that. And we got to play with that hardware. It's now sitting at home. I need to figure out a good use for it, but that's my problem. And then most of the talks that I attended were also really interesting. And of course, now I'm drawing a blank on on all of them that I saw. But I really, I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the talks too, and I think the other thing was also I think the social event was really neat as well. At least it was kind of a neat thing to actually kind of get around and talk with different people or get to know people as well. So I enjoyed that as well. So I guess that was kind of the thing for me, was just to be able to hang out a bit and talk with people, and then also just kind of learn some new things about what's going on with current developments in all the BSDs. And just kind of seeing what's new and stuff. I think it's also kind of fun to actually sit and see some of those talks instead of finding them later when they're posted online, because you also get a chance to at least ask some questions and stuff that you might not have had a chance to otherwise. So I would recommend it, especially if it's in if it's in a country that you're living in. It's not a horrible burden to get to it. I would say definitely do it. It's a nice conference and well run. So
yeah, they did an exceptionally good job this year as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So can we look forward to seeing you at another conference someday?
Maybe we'll see. I think in some ways that was since I ended up actually doing a talk, it kind of made it a bit. On one hand, it made it easier because then it was the trip, essentially the train ride from Oslo to Lillehammer was paid for and stuff, and the ticket into the conference. I mean, we'll have to see. I have to balance it against the how research what I'm doing in research and stuff, but there's not a I will say there's a chance. There's certainly a chance, maybe greater than 50%. We'll see.
You should have a lot of time after that PhD.
Well, they threw me right into work, so I guess I was a slightly irregular PhD student in that sense that. I was working for a research institute that really wanted me back. So I was happy to, in that case, it was very nice to be able to spend that last month or so writing and not have to worry about finding a job afterwards, which a lot of PhD students do have to think about. So
yeah, that's stressful. Yeah. Or it can be. Yeah.
Indeed.
So switching gears a little bit,
yes.
Since you started with the BSDs and then had a little bit of a break and then came back to it, do you have some tips or advice for people who are starting out with the BSDs, what they should do or what they should avoid, some pitfalls maybe?
Well, I think I will say when I started with FreeBSD, it was really kind of important to be able to use things that you had friends around that were using as well, because the thing was that the internet was much different in the late 90s than it is today, as far as being able to find information and stuff. So the nice thing was that you could kind of get real-time help right then and there. So I guess I would say one thing is like if you can get into BSDs with a friend, that will be helpful, because then you can kind of help each other as you kind of discover things. Although I think I think in general it's way easier to even just like start working with a BSD, since they're so easy to get a hold of a virtual machine thing. You can even get, you can download images and everything now without having to even install it. So I think that's also I think the thing that I would say is just go ahead and try it out, and see how it goes on something like VirtualBox or VMware or whatever your favorite virtualization platform is, because in general you can't get in too much trouble, right? Like worst case is you can always just delete that machine and start again. So I think that's actually pretty nice. And on the other hand, if you really want to try doing it for your daily driver, I mean, it depends on the work that you're doing, but I think nowadays it might be slightly easier than how it was again, if I go back to late 90s or early 2000s, because so many things now are running on web pages that in general are fairly using web standards. So as long as you have a decent web browser, which, with FreeBSD, you have like Firefox and Chromium that are there and are fairly up to date. Like you can actually, use most of those websites. So I think that's, I guess that's like the thing. It's like you can be, how could you say, less worried about breaking things. So you can just actually kind of go out and do it. I think also even if you were, for example, using FreeBSD and you have a ZFS thing built in on your laptop, you can also, as long as you remember to take snapshots or have an auto snapshot building thing, you can also be pretty fearless in what you're doing there as well. So I guess that would be the one thing. I guess I would say a tip, if you are going to use ZFS, you should really set up the auto ZFS tools pretty early when you get started, so you actually are automatically doing snapshots. So that you can actually roll back, because I think, it's easy to say like, oh, you just roll back to a snapshot, but if you forgot to take a snapshot, you're kind of, it's like you should have saved your work. It's like, yeah, but now I'm in this situation, and so I guess that would be I guess I could think of, if you were actually going to play around with FreeBSD, would maybe in the installer at some point to have an option to would you like to have some sort of automated snapshot thing? Just thinking about it now, but
yeah, that'd be decent. Just saying, in addition to whatever manual snapshots I might decide to make, please also make a snapshot every 15 minutes and keep, the last 4 hours and then some grandfathering type scheme.
Yeah, I think that's the only, I guess, if I was going to have a tip on that, is set that up, because then you can be much more fearless in what you're doing. You don't have to be too worried about breaking stuff. And then you can use boot environments as well. So that's nice with it.
And yeah, I guess the one I didn't really think about that much is the fact that nowadays with VMs, in the 90s, if you were going to put FreeBSD on a machine, it was probably going to be the only OS on the machine, or you might fight with dual booting or whatever. But you were pretty much giving the whole machine over to it. Whereas with the virtual machines, you can basically completely risk-free spin up a FreeBSD machine and start playing with it without having to risk, messing up your computer and having to fix it.
Exactly. I think the only thing that becomes a constraint then is just having enough disk space to kind of dedicate to it. So if you want to install a lot of software and see how that works, you kind of have to figure that out up front. But I mean, otherwise it's really nice. I have to admit, when I was first starting to look at FreeBSD again, that was the first thing I did. Was I loaded up a VirtualBox and put a FreeBSD image on there and just tried to see how it kind of worked, so I would have an idea of what I should do before I did it for real.
Planned it a little bit, yeah.
Well, you don't want to have to reinstall again. That's, or rather, if you've done a lot of work and then you find out you have to reinstall again, then that's kind of like annoying.
Yeah, after a while, it gets old.
Yeah, that's one option we'd like to look at adding someday is being able to have the installer be like, oh, I see you already have a FreeBSD installed. Maybe you've broken it. Would you like us to do a fresh install as a new boot environment, but leave all your old files behind so that, you can still get at them? But you'll have a system that boots cleanly again.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, more work for the future.
And I actually, before we let you go, I had another question about the robot OS. You just talked a little bit about it and how it's distributed or whatever. Is that like where one robot would consist of multiple computers, or is it more about making many robots kind of work together?
I guess it could be both if you wanted. Basically, it's these nodes that you create. And so each node has basically certain topics and stuff. So a robot, it's in itself, could have lots of nodes. So in one of my research projects, I was using this, to make it simple, I was using a turtle bot, which is basically a robot that has like a LiDAR sensor on top that spins around to kind of find its location. And then and it also had wheels to turn and everything. And so each of those things was like, there was a topic that would say like what speed the robot was going, like how it was turning or moving. There was another topic that was getting the data from the LiDAR and stuff. And then the whole point is that you could write another node that would like, oh, I'll listen to this information from the LiDAR and then use that, to figure out a map location. And then I'll use another node, which is talking about which has the planner for the robot, and then tell the robot where to move and stuff like that. So basically, what you do is you end up creating a lot of different nodes, and most of the nodes are written in either C++, Python, or Common Lisp, and in general, they'll be fast enough for what you're trying to do, as long as you're not trying to do real-time stuff. That's what ROS 2 is about. But if you're trying to do stuff that's kind of sort of close to real-time-ish and not flying in the air is one thing that was also kind of difficult with the ROS 1 stuff, or potential for problems, let's just say, where latency could become a real issue.
Yes, an unexpected spike of latency, and suddenly you're doing not the right thing.
Yeah, and if you have wind that picks up or anything like that, you could be in big trouble. But of course, you could set it up that you have like all these different robots that are broadcasting information on one node, or all listening on one command node, and then you just give one command, and they all could kind of interpret that as they want. So it's very much an interesting system. Like it's used for a lot of robots nowadays. But like a lot of the stuff is very research oriented. So the other thing is that most of the ROS stuff does not, at least the ROS 1.0 stuff, does not take security so much in mind. Which is kind of, it's kind of a using the FTP model you can think of, where you would like, you go to a known port and then it gives you another UDP port for listening on, but you don't know what that UDP port is. So basically, if you have a firewall, the first thing they tell you to do is like, well, could you create a VPN between you and the robot? So then you can talk to each other. So I believe they've tried to fix that in the later versions, but I remember that was actually an issue here at the university when you would try to, because the wireless network in general needs to be closed down, and suddenly you're like, I need to open all these ports, which I don't know what they are until we actually make a connection. And
they're kind of assigned randomly when you try to connect to the robot.
Exactly. And then it kind of, that doesn't work so well. So you have to kind of create a very specific, small, closed network. So, yeah. But in general, I would say nowadays, most robots should probably be on a closed network.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that gets back to more the research you were doing about how apply privacy and stuff to the robots. If the robot's got cameras for eyes and is recording what it's seeing, how do you decide what to do with that and so on?
Right. And then there's the other question of like, well, what is actually happening with that, the camera images and stuff? If the camera image is something that's just being used locally for something, like if it's a depth camera that's just trying to figure out the distance between different objects, and all that's being used is to like find the robot's location and plan where it's supposed to go, and that stuff is actually never going off to the internet or anything, like it's all being processed locally, then it's not such a big privacy issue, you could say. I mean, you could pretty safely argue, but like if it's the idea, it's like, oh no, that's going to be sent further on to the company that's providing this so that they have some insurance in case something bad happens, then it kind of opens up lots of different issues.
Yeah, or it's like I left the robot at home and I want to be able to see what it can see from my phone. Who else can also see this? And yeah, especially like you were saying, if I own the robot but it's from this company and the robot apparently causes some problem, or gets into trouble or breaks something or whatever, and I claim this is how it happened, does the company have the right to use the footage that shows that, no, it was me kicking the robot that caused the problem?
Right, exactly. So there's like a whole bunch of issues that are, you could say need to be looked at there. And that was like one of the things is like I could just take a look at a very small case, which was just kind of like, here's a way that we can kind of find these privacy issues. So I had a little framework for dealing with that. And then, then it was basically like, and now it's up to other people to do more. Or I guess me to write a future proposal and try to take that up. So, yeah.
Yeah, leave something for the future scientists. There's still work.
There is plenty. I was at this robot conference last week, and one of the points there was also like just looking at computer vision issues or like anything. If you're looking at having like a car being driven by a robot, right? There are so many issues or research problems that have not been solved and will not be solved for a long time that there's plenty of things for the future scientists. So no problems.
Excellent.
Yeah, and even you get things like, depending on how you did the machine learning for the robot, if it's doing facial recognition or something, where is it getting the database from? And how do you make sure the robot isn't accidentally racist?
Exactly. There's so much involved in that. So yeah, I think there's a point there where you actually kind of have to maybe apply other approaches as well to try to balance things out. That's a very difficult problem, but it's one that people are looking at. So.
Yeah, and but at the same time, you kind of have to refine the scope and pick one problem to solve at a time, because otherwise it just balloons and it's like, everything is wrong.
Indeed.
Well, was there anything else you'd like to talk about before we let you go?
I can't really think of anything off the top of my head other than what I should say is like, thanks very much for the show you guys do. It's kind of a highlight of the week, just to kind of be able to, it's a way to kind of catch up on the news that's been going on in the BSD world. So I really enjoy that. And yeah, looking forward to having more interviews. So hopefully this was entertaining enough as well.
Oh, yeah.
I think so. Thank you very much for agreeing to do it. And it was very nice to finally first get to meet you at EuroBSDCon, because I don't know that I would have ever run across you any other way.
No, I think that's kind of how it is, right? It's the BSD conferences give you a chance to actually meet all these people that you, wouldn't otherwise meet.
Yeah, well, for a lot of them, it's meeting people who I maybe have interacted with online before, but also it's really nice to meet the people I didn't even know existed.
Exactly.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on to the show, and good luck with your PhD and the future projects you're undertaking.
Yeah, thank you.
And we hope to see you at another conference again soon.
So we hope you liked this interview, and we have a little bit of Beastie Bits and announcements for you at the end. So this is what we're going to get right into now.
Yeah, so very big thanks to Trent for doing the interview and for all of you for watching. But we weren't going to leave you with just an interview, so we have some Beastie Bits to remind you about, especially as we're pre-recording the next couple episodes, so announcements don't always fit. First one, there's going to be a FreeBSD mini conference at the linux.conf.au in Australia in 2020. And so this is in the days leading up to linux.conf.au proper. They have mini conferences for a number of different topics. And the proposal this year is one of those to be FreeBSD, but we need to basically show that we're going to have enough different speakers and so on that would be interested. So if you would like to present about FreeBSD at linux.conf.au, please check out the link in the show notes to the FreeBSD Foundation's blog and get your submissions in so that we can show that there is enough interest in order to make this happen.
Yes, they're similar. Like these mini-confs are comparable to, let's say, the BSD Dev Room at FOSDEM. And it's Australia, it's the Gold Coast. So if you're in the area or want to go, that's definitely a place you should talk about BSDs more. So submit a proposal and hopefully you will be accepted.
Other one that we have coming up, the Portland BSD Pizza Night is October 24th. So that's the day this comes out. So you might have already missed it. But is at 7 p.m. at Rudy's Gourmet Pizza. So make sure you check out Calligator, which is the kind of calendar aggregator used in Portland for events of this type. And so if you get subscribed there, you can get the notifications automatically. So that, for example, if because of our recording schedule, you have missed the notification about tomorrow's pizza night or today's pizza night or whatever that works out to be, then you will definitely get it next time.
Yep, they're doing this regularly.
And also, speaking of that, the New York City BSD user group, their next meeting will be November 6th at 6:45 at Suspenders. And they'll be doing an install fest, but also as a special treat, the SDF project will be bringing their Unix at 50 AT&T 605 terminal to the meeting. So if you would like to get to play with that, you should definitely come check it out.
Ooh, that sounds cool. And if you're a newbie, the installation workshop is a great way to get to know the BSDs. And I guess there's a couple of people around who can answer your questions if you get stuck somewhere. Thanks for the nice bug, folks, or the BSD user groups there. Then I already started talking about it a little bit. FOSDEM in 2020, they have already started their calls for participation. There is the BSD Dev Room in particular. So we have a little info page from Rodrigo, who has organized and will also continue to organize this one. In 2020, this will be on the Sunday, so not the Saturdays that we got in earlier years. So don't get confused. The submission deadline for that Dev Room is the 24th of November, but don't slack off. Submit early, submit often, and the more we submit, the more chances we have to actually fill a whole day for BSDs. So this could be all kinds of BSD topics, whether you're a user, a developer, or sysadmin in some interesting ways that might be interesting for other people attending FOSDEM. So that is definitely something you should consider submitting to. And Rodrigo has put up a couple of information for the people who have never been to FOSDEM, like transportation and venue map, and some information about, what kind of topics we want to see. And so there's plenty of information on the page that we linked here in our show notes. So I would recommend checking that out.
Yep. And lastly, if you were looking for a job that might involve actually working on FreeBSD and security and so on, the University of Cambridge is currently looking for new research assistants and research associates to work on the Cherry compiler and OS support projects. So any past experience with FreeBSD or with Clang and LLVM would be particularly helpful. So if you'd like to get to work with that kind of stuff and work on interesting new projects, then check out the job posting from Cambridge University in the UK.
And with that, we thank you again for listening to this special episode. And next week, we'll be back with a regular one. And enjoy the time until then. And see you and you listen to us actually, then next week again.
Yep. And remember, send any questions, comments, show ideas, topics, stories, or feedback that you have to feedback@bsdnow.tv so that we can incorporate it into the show.